Welcome to Leadership Beyond Burnout. I'm your host, Dr. Kimberly L. Wilson. Today we have a very special guest for you. It is Joana Tudela. Let me tell you a little bit about her. Joana Tudela, born in Portugal and raised in Venezuela, moved to the U.S. at 18, overcoming language and cultural barriers. With over 12 years of experience, she excels in enhancing language and cultural services in public health while focusing on Latinx, immigrant, BIPOC, and Limited-English Proficient communities. Joana holds a BS in Medical Laboratory Sciences, an MA in Translation and Interpreting Studies, and a Master's in Public Health. Joana works as a language access consultant and corporate bilingual trainer at Culturizing Access. Make sure you check out the website. She is a United Latinas and ALPFA New Jersey board member and belongs to the American College of Healthcare Executives, New Jersey chapter. She co-authored Hispanic Stars Rising, Volume 3, and in 2023, Joana co-founded Immigrants Beyond Immigration. It's a nonprofit helping immigrants understand the American system through language-specific programs. She's also the winner of the 2023 Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute Pitch Competition, which addresses healthcare and Latinos through her business. And without further ado, let's bring her to the stage. Hello, Joana. Thank you so much for coming today.
Hi, Dr. Kim. A pleasure to be here with you.
I want to dive right in and get to what I want to call is the heart of the matter, because I know a little bit about your story and why you started this business. So I'd love for you to share with everyone why it was important for you to have this type of business.
Yeah, so my business really started out of necessity. I actually never really thought about having my own business. That was never the plan. It just came out of really necessity in a lot of fields, but especially in the healthcare setting. Because, like you said, I came to the U.S. Not speaking English, so I've been what we call a Limited-English Proficient or LEP person. And that means anybody that speaks English less than very well. Doesn't mean they don't speak English, it's just less than very well. So that means that they need, for special conversations like healthcare, finance, legal things, they prefer to have these conversations in their primary language. So I've been there, right? This is like our ultimate client. Then I moved into translation and interpretation. So I've been on the interpreting side, bridging the gap between, professionals and providers with these LEP communities. And then, I moved into public health and I started, working as a health educator. I also work in healthcare as a lab tech, so in different areas. So I've been a provider myself. So I found myself in a very unique situation of being part of every single, angle of this triangle of intercultural communication. And that gives me a very unique perspective. But really what started my business was my mom moved to the U.S. a few years ago. So her English, it's very basic as of right now. She's older. And, taking her to the doctor several times, me having to interpret regardless of how many times I have to call and tell them that I needed an interpreter, all these things. But what really got me to the point to be like, okay, this is it. If not now, when? If not who? Who's going to do it, right? So it was when I took her to do a PET scan. And, she was in the changing room and there was a sign in English saying, if you have special underwear like anti-odor, antimicrobial, you please let us know because this can cause severe burns. Oh. So I was like, okay, this obviously was here because something happened before, right? But why was this not in other languages, especially when I live in New Jersey, which is a huge diverse community. And I live in Central Jersey with over, 50% of the population speaks another language. It's basically immigrants in my town. So why are we not having this in Spanish? Why are we not having this in Hindi, which are like the two major languages in my area? And, I try to talk to the hospital. I send, a 3-page letter telling them all the things they're doing wrong. And they responded, but then COVID hit, right? So that was pretty much the end of it. So that frustration, I was like, what would have happened if I wasn't there and my mom had that? And then she would have gone, burns and her private parts. Like, this
Right.
is not okay. This is not only not okay, but this is the law. They're not following the law. So I was like, okay, obviously there is some gap between, there's a lot of language service providers. So there's a lot of organizations and agencies that provide translation and interpreting, and obviously
Right.
healthcare organizations. But something is missing. Something is missing in between. People think the interpreter is only to be there when the provider is there. But what about before? What about the check-in? What about the phone calls to make the appointment? What
The
about
website.
that my chart? What about the website, right? What are all these barriers to really get the care in an equal patient center way? So I
Right.
was like, okay, I have that unique position because I understand the struggles and the challenges of everybody involved. So
Right.
that's kind of how Culturizing Access started, really as a necessity for my culture, my people, which is the immigrant and the public health providers, really.
Right. And when you hear me, when I hear you talk about your experience, and it really makes me think about how it seems to be more of an afterthought in America for so many things. It doesn't seem like it's important. It's like, oh, it's just kind of nice to have, like it's a little vitamin. Yeah, we'll get to it, but not a necessary vital thing. There was one time when I had my students, I presented them, and they're graduate students in counseling, and I gave them a form in Tagalog, and I put them in the groups and asked them to complete the form. Now they were able to figure out which one was name, but they had no clue what this was about, what they were supposed to do to it, because I wanted to give them that experience, that destabilizing experience of, oh my goodness, I could imagine that with frustration, so many immigrants or limited English proficient people would just leave. Or am I overstating that?
No, I love that. I think we should be doing this everywhere, right? Because anybody, and it doesn't have to even be healthcare, in any industry, you're going to find LEPs. You're going to find individuals that don't speak English very well. And if you want to thrive in your business, if you want your business to succeed, you have to serve these individuals, even if you're just retail, right? So everywhere in the range. And I love the exercise that you did and they were not able to figure out. But I especially love that you're doing this with counseling students, because mental health, it's very, very important for the immigrant and, the limited English population, because you have this trauma from immigration. Regardless of how you came to the States, you always have some trauma. You always have, that feeling that you don't belong or that you belong into places. So there's a lot of things that we always have to go through. And it is a huge, barrier when it comes to values for mental health for a lot of communities, the Asian community, the African American community, the Latino community. We all have these like values against, mental health. So,
Right.
you educating your students, it's beautiful. I love that.
Right. And I really believe if more people had the opportunity to go to other countries, like I've been in South Africa, Japan, Korea, uh, the Philippines, and when everyone is speaking another language and you aren't proficient at all and trying to communicate is such a challenge, right? But although most countries do kind of speak English because they know America's kind of stubborn and we just don't want to learn anything else. I had an experience where I was swimming in the Sea of Japan, a young Marine, and I got stung by a jellyfish. And my arm started turning purple. Like it was going up. And so we got on the motorcycle and I'm just trying to I'm just pointing at my arm. I don't know what to say. They don't speak because we're in the rural part of Japan. We're not in a very populated part. And finally someone was like, I got I got this cream for you. So relieved. So I can't healthcare is critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have, some conversations with some individuals saying like, well, they should learn English and things like that, which I'm not really going to go into, the whole issue of that. But what I like to answer to them without going into politics or things like that is that there's certain things that cannot wait for you to speak English, right? regardless of your thought if they have to speak English or not. There's certain things that cannot wait. You can't move to the country, even if you're a tourist. But even if you move here, you can't wait, until your body, like, don't get sick until you learn English. Like, don't go to school, don't open a bank account, don't get a lawyer until you learn English. Like, there's certain things that just can't wait. And healthcare is one of them. You can't expect people to wait because learning a language takes years. I mean, I was very fortunate that when I came, I already spoke 2 languages. So I was 18, so I learned it within 3 months. But
Wow.
that's very privileged on my side. A lot of individuals take years, and it takes a long time for you to learn a language. So it's not realistic to expect people to not, receive any kind of care, especially emergency care, just because they don't speak the language. So yeah.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I know learning Spanish has been on my list since I was 19, and I still haven't done it because it's hard for an old dog to learn new tricks. And so I imagine it's the same way when you're coming from somewhere else and you're asked to, you know, learn the language. But how does a healthcare provider who has a small private practice and say they're not a large hospital, a large mental health facility, how can they do something to become more language proficient and accessible for immigrant communities or limited English proficient?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's not cheap. I mean, I'm going to be very honest. It's really not cheap, but it's actually not optional. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act says that you cannot discriminate individuals from their origin, and that includes their language. And the ACA and, Obamacare, how we call it, there's executive orders. There's a lot of things that require that if you receive any federal funding, by law, you have to provide language services, even if you only have one patient. That's it. It's not like a percentage of patients, a certain amount minimum. No, it's one patient that requires. If you don't do it, you're breaking the law, and they can sue you for that. It's as simple as that. But now looking at, financially how we can really make this make a little bit more sense.
Right.
I would definitely look into the demographics of the services and really see what are your top languages. You have to translate your website. You have to translate vital documents. That will be basically like a one-time, more expensive charge. But when it comes to the daily routine, having an interpreter there, they're relatively cheaper options. So if you really need the service a lot, it might make sense for you to hire an in-house interpreter. Right. But if it's something that happens from time to time, there's so many agencies that charge by the minute. So you're really, between 75 cents to $1.50, something like that. And they'll only charge you by the minute. So you only pay by it. Oh. And I know Medicare or Medicaid pays a little bit depending on the state that you are. They might reimburse you between 50% to 100%. So you really don't get your money back, all of it. And a lot of organizations think of language services as a loss. But there's so many things that we don't charge, we don't charge the patient and are part of the healthcare that we absorb as costs. So language services should not be anything different. The way I like to tell them is that, average lawsuit related to language access is $5 million. So not counting PR, the whole amount of money you're going to have to be spending on PR to fix the issue when you go into the news about, a patient being severely harmed or dying, right?
Wow.
So save your $5 million and invest, a third of that into translating, into, having, if not in-house, partner with agencies to really see it. But it really comes to compliance with the law. It comes to patient safety. It comes to, now we're moving into patient-centered care. That's what we all want. You can't provide that to these communities if you're not providing language. So it's just, an expensive, simple solution, but it's also the law.
Right. So, when you were saying that, the first thing I had in my head was all the mental health providers and private practice. I was like, oh, I don't get federal funding. But if you take Medicaid, If
You
you take
are.
Medicare, that is federal funding. So, or even if you possibly have some grant money coming in for certain things.
Yeah,
So it
absolutely.
applies
People
to a
don't
lot of
think about it
situations.
like that, but that's it. If you take one Medicare, one Medicaid, that's it. You're in. Anything that comes from the money, one weak patient, one anything, you're pretty much in there. So
Right. And you also had me remember during the very early on in the pandemic, there were a lot of cruise ships. I don't know if you remember this, that were stuck and hit by COVID, and they couldn't move anywhere. And there were a lot of people with very different languages on there, and it was so um, heartwarming to see that they planned for that. So we had access, the counselors had access to interpreters for people that spoke Mandarin, that spoke Cantonese, that were speaking a variety of different languages, Spanish, everything. And now it took longer to get it, but I was so relieved that we could give them peace of mind because someone spoke the language.
yeah, I mean, COVID, I love the story. I didn't know that. I love it. But, COVID, a lot of, among all the bad things, it also brought a lot of things to light about, our country, the world. But let's focus on our country, right?
Right.
We had a huge issue with the Latino community, because they were disproportionately affected by it. Because as other, minority communities like the African Americans, they tend to do, the more working class jobs. So they were, front. What's the word I'm looking for? I froze. But
Front
they were.
facing customer.
Yes, exactly. Working at agriculture, meat packers, groceries, jobs that could not stop.
Right.
We couldn't live, right? The society
And
wouldn't make anything if this job stopped. So they were forced to continue working. What a lot of us were fortunate enough to come to our houses for months, right? For years, for some of us.
right.
But it really brought in the community of the Latino community the big problem with the language, because the information was not getting to the Latino community because it wasn't getting in Spanish. And by the time it got in Spanish, it was either bad Spanish, it was either outdated because information was just coming in, like whatever was happening one day, the next day was completely worthless, right? So it
Wow.
was
True.
either bad translated or it was old and outdated. So it was a big, big problem. And I just highlighted, the significance of having processes across, the federal government, local government, everywhere, really reaching the community when an emergency happens. And it's not a pandemic, it could be any emergency, right? If we're not notifying our communities in a fast and efficient way, even if it's, I don't know, there's a tornado coming, right? Like, why are we
Right.
not prepared of saying this in 20 different languages? Why are we expecting people to get, the Amber Alerts only in English, Like things like that, things that we don't really think about, but
Right.
it's true, right?
Right.
So yeah, that's what the pandemic brought.
And I believe you shared with me before the story about a Native American man who didn't get services in his language. I'd love for you to kind of share that story because it wasn't the pandemic, correct?
Absolutely not. That was in 2018. It was 2018, and I love that you bring that because a lot of people also think that language services are only for immigrants, is an immigration issue, or but it's not. It's not. Yes, 64% of LEPs are Latinos, and Asian Americans have a higher rate of being LEPs than anybody else. But language access, language services is not just for immigrants. We're talking about Native Americans, especially the older community that were forced to forget that they were forced to assimilate. And,
Right.
we're having all these issues with preserving their language. But Native Americans also need language services. And I'll get back to this man, but we're also looking at the deaf and hard hearing community. Looking at the
Mm.
blind community, that's another 9 million individual in addition to the 26 million LEPs. So language services is not an immigration issue. So I just kind of want to clarify. And an example of that is this Navajo man that unfortunately he died in 2018 in New Mexico when he went 3 times to his closest health center. And none of those times they actually had interpreters that were, trained. So they were using family members, they were using bilingual staff, they were using whatever they had except qualified interpreters. So by the time they figure out what he had, it was just too late. And that just came in the news in 2023 around March because,
Hmm.
the lawsuit came out. So now it's in the process of it. We'll see, how much they're going to be having to pay. But this happened in 2018. So it's not something that, oh, it's just happened a long time and it's not COVID related either. It's still happening nowadays.
Wow. And you stimulated a thought because I've witnessed this sometimes in offices where a staff member is asked to be the interpreter or do double duty and not be adequately compensated for that. And I'm thinking about the burnout from having to do that, and not and even just burnout in the communities when you're not getting adequate services to fit your needs. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
Absolutely. Poor language services really is a burnout on everybody involved. Let's start with the patient or the client, right? The burnout of having to find somebody to go with them or depending on somebody for communicating, the frustration at it when you have to cancel an appointment because nobody could go with you because you don't have that interpreter with you. Now let's look at the burnout of the bilingual staff, which is huge because a lot of the times we hire bilinguals without testing them, which we shouldn't do that. That's a whole different liability we're talking about. But let's focus on burnout. We're expecting these individuals to do their jobs. Let's say medical assistant, right? And not only they have their full plate as being their tasks and their duties daily, but we're also expecting them to, stop what they're doing by keeping, the quality of their work and not being late on their work, and then stopping and coming and interpreting for us quickly here and there, adding that burnout, and then not getting paid in addition to that. So it just adds up to the
Right.
burnout into this individual. So they just end up leaving because they're just working harder than everybody else and not being compensated more and having the same standards when it comes to efficiency when you're taking time from their work hours to do work other person's work because an interpreter is a whole other person's work, not to mention that they're not trained, not to mention that many times they're not tested, so we don't even know how well they speak both languages
Right.
and the medical terminology, which is huge, and where we see all these liabilities and these lawsuits and these problems because they don't know the medical terminology. And then let's look at providers, the monolingual provider that uses the service, the burnout it is for them of, having to do extra work, longer appointments because it takes longer to have an interpreter. It takes even longer to have an untrained interpreter, right?
Mm.
And then having to repeat things several times because you're not using a trained interpreter, and having to explain to that, bilingual staff or family member what something means. So it just adds more and more into the person. And then at the end, if you don't have the tools to do your job, you kind of
Right.
lose, the passion because you can go into healthcare regardless of what area of healthcare if you don't have passion
Right.
for saving lives, for helping other individuals. And it just gets tiresome if you just don't have the tools and you have this frustration that every time you see, an LEP individual, you're like, oh, okay, here we go. Where is the interpreter? Now it's going to be late. And where is the person that's bilingual? Oh, she's in another appointment. Oh, I have to wait for her to. So it just keeps adding. So it really burns everybody in the system, including the cost. We're adding extra tests. We're
Right.
adding people not following their treatment. They're not following their treatments. They're coming back to the hospital, higher readmission rates, worse scenarios of, because medication is not taking. So whatever they have, it just gets worse. So they come back. So it's more expensive, the cure. So we just keep adding and adding. So when we're looking at cost, it's also burnout in that area. So
So
yeah,
it's an inefficiency
absolutely.
all around. And then if you compound it with a mental health issue as well for anyone within that system, there's increased frustration and just unwillingness to want to see things through. I don't know why I'm getting tongue tied here, but I could imagine someone who is feeling depressed. Just why bother? I know how I'm going to be treated. It's going to take them forever. Will my ride want to stay?
Yeah. And mental health is, I mean, it's very dear to my heart. I always promote it and things like that because as an immigrant, it's really hard, right? I've suffered, from depression, from anxiety. It's, it goes up and down, but the loneliness, I mean, I came by myself. Now I have my mom, I have my sister, I have friends, but I was one of the first people leaving Venezuela when things started to get bad there politically. So I finished high school and I came. I was very, fortunate I went to college here. But that moment, those years that nobody understood what I was going through, it was really hard because I couldn't speak with anybody here because this is their country. They don't understand what it means to not understanding the language, not understanding the culture, not understanding the system, not understanding anything. And then I would go back home and I would talk to my parents, and parents would be like, leave everything, come back. I'd be like, I can't do that. I'm in college. Like, that's not it. That's not the solution. And then I would
That's
talk
what
to
I
my
thought you would bring you on back.
and I was like, just drop it, just come, right? But then I would talk to my friends, and they wouldn't understand because they would live with their parents, they were still in their country, so I had nobody to talk to. And then I would get, mental health. I would get a psychologist and things like that. And I don't know why I never thought about getting one that spoke Spanish, but I never, they would just never really understand my struggles. But then
Right.
in the beginning of 2023, I found one. There was an immigrant from Venezuela, and it just clicked. And I never done therapy in Spanish before, and it was so different. I was like, wow, like he got me because now he lives abroad as well, so he understood why I left. He understood my culture from home. He understood the new culture, the struggles, and it just made it so much easier to speak, even though I can do it in English with no problem. But that
Right.
understanding, that cultural connection, it was life changing, to be honest.
Oh, I absolutely can relate because that when I look for a therapist, that is what I look for. I look somebody who looks like me, who I don't have to explain every single nuance and try to get an understanding or even experience little microaggressions or micro insults, micro assaults, because they haven't dealt with their own
Absolutely.
issues.
That's why we need more providers. There are minorities that speak other languages. There are immigrants. There are Black. There are Asian. We need more representation. Just because it's so much easier, right? Not having to explain why this is hard for me as, as a woman, as an immigrant, as a Black person, as whatever it might be, right? Like not having to explain to them why I'm telling you it's a problem is just so much easier.
Right. I know when I was looking for a provider, a therapist, and I don't know, I decided to get on the soapbox this day. And because I always look at the websites and I check out everything, and I just said, no, I wanted to make an appointment with you all, but there is pretty much a homogenous website. Your therapist, there's no diversity in your therapist, and it's like, well, we have I think it was a Latinx therapist. Like, okay, and it just it was like they were championing. Okay, we have that one. We have that one, and I didn't feel like I was understood or there was any effort made out of, and I hear so many times like, oh, for example, I don't know, are there any Black therapists around? Are there any Black women with people? Yeah, there's a bunch.
Not
There are
enough, but
one.
there's many, yeah.
Yeah, there's enough of anything. You just have to look and make an effort to bring some equity into your
But then
business.
again, it's a burn on the patient, right? It's a burn on me who already need the services, and I already have the issue of who my insurance takes. And then I'll have to find
Mm,
somebody that looks like me because not everybody has it. And it's like, you just keep adding the burn on me who
right,
needs the services when it should be, easier. I should be able to go anywhere and find it, right? In an ideal world, like I understand a lot of, issues that are the reason why we're where we are. But
right.
it's true.
So if for someone who isn't part of a diverse community, what are some of the things they can do as individuals to be more proficient? So if you are in a community where there aren't diverse professionals or someone who's like you said blind or hearing deficient, how could they make a difference and accommodate and support?
Well, I mean, the reality is that it's really hard to find a community that has no, diversity. I mean, there's some, but it's there. We have to look for it. But
Mhm.
if you really want to support those communities that need language access and diverse communities, it's really about using your privilege as being a majority, because that's what you are, to ask. It's like, I noticed your website is only in English, but I have like three neighbors that speak Mandarin. Like, can they come here? How are they gonna, get your services? Like, just
Right,
ask, right? Or like the signs, like, oh, it's interesting. You have the sign. What happened? And they will tell you, like, oh, well, obviously we put the sign because something happened. It's like, okay, but I see this patient sitting there. Like, are they gonna understand this?
right,
Like being curious about why things are the way they are, especially if you know somebody, a neighbor, a friend that needs the services, right?
mhm,
You might know somebody that's deaf or hard hearing. And even if you know somebody that has, walking disabilities, it's hard for them. That's when you start noticing things like, oh, the sidewalk. And you don't even actually have to go into somebody with the actual disability. I started
mhm,
noticing sidewalks, for example, when I had a son. When I had
mhm,
my baby, I moved to New Jersey and I had to take my son from the train like 7 blocks to the daycare and the
mhm.
stroller. And the stroller will get stuck in every block. And I'll be like walking around and moving and I'll be like, why is this not straight? Like, I can't
Right,
even push my car for my
right,
son. Imagine somebody in a wheelchair. And then, of course, they're walking on the street because they can't do it and then they get hit. So, you don't really have to know somebody to start seeing these struggles, right? Because even
right,
throughout your life, they put you in similar situations. When you break a foot, then you start being like, why do I have to walk all this? Why are there not elevators? Right? You're like, okay, well, imagine somebody that has an actual disability that
right,
needs these services. So it's just being aware of who is around you and curious about and, using our voices of privilege to start making changes. Because yes, we need representations on the tables, but we also
right.
need people to ask for us to be on the table to talk. So it has to be both ways.
Okay. So it could be someone in the community, or it could be the actual provider or someone at the organization that provides the services. Like, oh, I noticed we don't have this. And I'm wondering how difficult is that a political landmine in some workspaces to say, hey, we don't have this. Can we get it?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of toxic organizations, but like I said, language services, language access really comes to the law. And Title VI of the Civil Rights Act is for every industry. If they receive federal funding, they don't have to be healthcare. They can be legal, they can be finances, they can be anything. And then if you want to look from, let's look outside of, the legal portion. If
Okay.
you are a business and you want to thrive and survive, you need to reach to the minority communities. And I'm going to talk about the Latino community because I know the number to the back of my head. But Latinos, we have a purchasing power of $1.9 trillion and a GDP to this country of $2.6 trillion. We are bigger than Mexico, faster growing than the Chinese GDP. So if you want to bring your business to fruition, if you want to grow, you need our business. And if you want our business, you need to start speaking Spanish. Not because we don't speak English, that's not it. A lot of Latinos, more than half of Latinos speak English. That's not the point. But we are a generational and we respect hierarchy. So I purchase the products that my mom trusts and she purchases the products of my grandma. And the one that doesn't speak English, it's probably grandma.
Right.
So that's how it works. We are very loyal. Once one go into one brand or one, product or company, all of us go. So that's just how it is. So it's not even about being legal. It's about, what business is about, money. So if you care about money, you want to grow. And that's how you bring it up to your boss. Be like, hey, we want to grow, right? We want more money. We want to. So let's look into, this neighborhood over here that has this particular culture. Why are we not marketing to them? Why are we not creating a marketing campaign in their language, appreciating their culture, bring them in? Because they're very tight communities. Immigrant communities are very tight. And one goes, the whole community goes. So that's my advice. That's how you get to your boss, the money, right?
Well, that's an excellent idea. I was also thinking as you were talking about that, I was considering what impact does it have when organizations, like sometimes I'll see, oh, I'm losing my word, when they pretend to accommodate a community and it's like, oh, it's Latin American month. Let's celebrate Hispanic heritage, but that's the only time. What impact does that
I have,
have?
I
And
have
how
a
they
good
seem to,
friend. I have a good friend that she always says, "Don't call me only in September. We're here year round. Like we're not just here in September. September 15th to October 15th is not just where Latinos are. We're here year round. Same thing with the Black community, right? Or women. We're not here just in February or March. We're here all the time. So yes, celebrate us during our month, whatever might be that month. Asian American month is in May. So yes, celebrate their culture, appreciate it, use it to promote it, but also the rest of the year work with them. So use that time to learn about their barriers, their needs, and then the other 11 months create something so that the following, celebration, it's like, look, we found out that you had this problem in 2022. And now in 2023, we came out with this product to solve your problems. So really look at minorities, at all groups, not as a 1 month celebration or 1 week, because some of them only get 1 week, right? Because we're here year round, right? We're your clients year round.
right. So if an organization, a business wanted to take a meaningful first step, so it sounds like you said, ask the community what would be most helpful. Some type of survey in their language. Is like,
Yes,
what would you suggest?
absolutely. The first step, what I do with all my clients before anything is let's do an assessment. Let's do an assessment on your demographics, of the numbers of your communities, but let's also do an assessment internally. So my assessment is it's very different than anything else I've seen out because not only I look at the demographics, but I also look at focus groups. So I have focus groups that talk with the employees using the services, a focus group with the bilingual individuals or the interpreters, and a focus group for the LEP patients. Because a lot of the times we send surveys, but they're not in their language, so they won't answer it. So we're really not getting what they're feeling. And then we might do focus groups. We might do, whatever equivalents, having a community group so we get input. But are we really intentionally looking to have LEPs there? So that's what you have to do. That's the first step. Really see what their struggles are. Like my assessment also includes a walkthrough. You know, And that doesn't even have to be for language access. I always tell, people like, oh, how's my business doing? Like, have you ever tried to call your own business and see how hard it is to get to you or to your boss or to your coworker? How many people you have to go through to get to where you want to do? Or have you ever walked through a different door of your building? Like, because we always get, the employee side, right? We're always in and out, always. Try to walk in a different door. See how clean it is. See how organized it is. See who you see. That'll change your perspective. Kind of like how they say that sometimes you have to brush your teeth with your non-dominant hand. So your brain actually starts thinking about, wait, how do you brush your teeth? Because we do it so automatically. That's the first step.
Right.
And that's when you're going to start noticing, like, okay, I see a lot of images, but they all kind of look the same. Okay, I see, like, oh, this is, pretty dirty. Like, why is our, waiting room so dirty? Like, what's going on in here? Or why there's so many people and there are not enough chairs? Or, why do I have to wait 20 minutes to get on hold to my secretary? My secretary should be getting my phone immediately, like, why is it so hard for somebody to come and talk to me? So all these little things, and they're not language specific, really. They're just customer service.
One of the things that I've really seen that's prevalent in many offices and many different types of businesses, without advertising, it seems that there is an awareness that, I'm trying to say this delicately, that Americans are getting bigger and the chairs are now double, triple the width they are. So it's nice to see that they're trying to accommodate, have chairs for those that are larger. So that seems to be a good step.
Absolutely.
So that's one of the ways they can start with assessment, because I know a lot of people would just be like, oh, well, let me just ask this representative that works here, what do we need to do? Because no one wants to be the spokesperson for their community.
And that's why I come in, right? Because a lot of, like, even if you have a department for language access or language services, nobody listens to the coordinator or the director, right? And they're so busy making sure that the person is. But when you bring somebody from the outside, people tend to listen better. Even though, like my mom says, like, I've told you this like 10 times, but somebody else comes and tells you, and now you're going to do it. And I'm like, that's kind of how it works, right? Like, bring somebody from the outside and you'll hear, even though your people are probably telling you exactly the same thing. But it helps. It helps to have fresh eyes, and bring in that perspective for sure.
Right. So my guess is that a service such as yours, when you come in, you try to partner with those departments so that then you're not competing with them, but you're trying to support them in their initiatives and the goals of the organization, I guess it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So what makes me very different than anybody else is that I don't provide language services. Like, I don't provide translation or interpretation. I mean, I do some translation for very specific clients, like I do translation for CDC, but I don't do, translation for most of my clients. I'm a neutral party. And I'm also not there to take, that coordinator job either. I'm there to support them because they just don't have the capacity to look at all these things. So I come in, I do the assessment, and then I'm like, okay, let's train your staff on how to work with interpreters. Let's train your staff on the Hispanic patient or the Asian American patient or the Arabic patient. Let's, create SOPs, because a lot of individuals don't have processes. And I know healthcare loves processes, but for some reason we forget language services processes. So create that, a folder, and when you have new employees, here's your training, so everybody knows where to get the interpreter, where to get the translated document or form. And that's kind of how we work. And then from there, it's just pretty much maintenance. Like, I'll come for trainings and things like that, but it's just really more of a supportive role. And I'm not trying to stay there as the language services person. I'm not trying to sell you that translation or that interpreting. I just find whatever works for you, because my main goal is that the organization works, so my people, get what they need. That's really my goal.
So is it helpful? Because I was trying to think about it, like, if I were wanted to start this, because I'm thinking about my business as well now. It's like, okay, you're lagging behind. You're seriously lagging behind. And I think the question that came for me is like, well, where do you start? Do you create visuals, making sure that there's adequate representation on your website, and then the corresponding forms at the same time, or what? Like,
I mean, I guess the one-on-one would be to make sure that your images, your visuals everywhere in your organization and in your website and your social media are always diverse and you're always including. Because if I don't see myself there, I'm not even going to look. I'm not even,
right,
like you said, right? I don't see anything that looks for me. That's not for me. I move on.
right,
That will be the first step. Then definitely translate the basic things. But when we translate, we have to be, you know, purposeful. We have to be mindful. A lot of organizations, translate their websites. It's like, great, you translate your website, but then you click on contact us and that's where it ends because nobody's answering the phone in my language. Nobody's emailing me back in my language. So you have to
mm,
have all these steps and think when the communication breaks because I can see your product in my language and be like, oh, I want that. Okay, how do I get that? Because I can't send you a quick chat. I can't post on your social media because you're not going to respond in my language. I can't call you because so that's it. Like you stopped me right there.
wow,
So, and there are, relatively cheaper ways to do it. There are agencies that provide customer service in other languages. Or if the need gets to the point, then hire somebody that speaks the language. Test them before, please, but hire them. And really, you'll see like, yes, it's a first step that will cost you money. But once you start getting all those clients, it's all revenue, really.
So are there services that you know of readily that translate forms or that do testing of people for language proficiency? Like, is there some national organization or
We're not there yet. There's not like one
no?
place that I can send you to. So there's several organizations that have testing. I'm working with one to, because I really like their testing, especially because it's specific for clinical. Because what I found is that, yes, they might test the proficiency on, whatever other language in French, right? But if
Mhm.
you're not testing also the terminology that I need you to, I can't know for sure that you can, serve me well and not be a liability for me. And this could
Right.
be legal terminology, financial, healthcare, medical terminology. Because the way I like to say is like you and I are speaking English, right? And we can have a lot of conversations. But can we have a conversation about astrophysics? Can we have a conversation about legal things? Can we have a conversation about, I don't know, like architecture? Like, I don't know anything about like construction, right? Like, I might know, the bulldozer and the thing, but beyond that, I don't know. I have to learn it. So, the same
Right.
way that you had to go to school to learn medical terminology in English, pretty much needed in the other language. So I have had a hard time finding tests that have both things. And
Wow.
that creates still a liability for that.
This has been such an eye opener. And I'd love to hear if there was anything that I didn't ask you that you wish I did, or do you have any last words to share?
Um, I think I want to go back to what you said about, the language access being something of a second thought. And that's really the reality where we are. And that's actually the challenge of my business because I know the need is there.
Hmm.
But I feel like every time I approach, organizations, they're like, we don't have the time. It's just not a priority. We don't have the budget, and it's like, okay, so what's your focus? Well, it's patient safety. Well, let me tell you, let me tell you that LEPs are 3 times more likely to have a severe, moderate to severe, including death, adverse event
Mm,
resulting for, a health event. And 54% of those times are due to communication. So if you want to look at patient safety, look at language. Oh, we're looking at burnout of our staff. Well, let's look at your bilingual staff and how burned out they are, or your providers that are so frustrated because they can't serve their clients the way they want to. Or
right.
what other priority do you have? Well, we want to save money. We're like, well, let me tell you how language access saves you money. If by providing quality language access, you reduce 25% of readmission rates, that not only costs more money for your hospital, but also it penalizes you with the CMS, right? Because you get
Right.
penalized for having readmissions. So you're going to be getting more money back from that, get less penalties, and use less, of your staff, of your products, of your services that are not necessary. So it's just about that. We look at it as whenever I get a chance to, but it's really not. Like my podcast says, language access is not a vitamin. It's
Right.
really a painkiller. It's really what's going to save your business in the long run, because we're not going anywhere. Immigrants are not going anywhere. Deaf and blind people are not going anywhere. Native Americans are not going anywhere. Tourists are not going anywhere.
Right.
Like if you want to expand internationally, you got to go anywhere. So really, however you look at it, you know, look at it from that side.
That it behooves you. I love that. And I'd also like to share from the mental health perspective how that happens. When I was a very young wee clinician, and I was doing in-home services, and I got to the home. You could not tell that this was a diverse family from the name. And the very first session, parents did not speak English, and I was working with the child, so it was so uncomfortable because you should never put a child in a position to have to translate. And we're working on the child's behavior, and then the child needs to translate
How are you
to
going
the
to tell the child? Tell your parents. Tell your
yeah.
parents to not let you do this. I'm like, sure I will.
Yeah, then not only is there the opportunity for manipulation, it's an unfair burden on the child, and this is totally inappropriate. And I just thought, I can't go back to this house because I don't know if I'm even serving them properly.
Yep.
So that was a gap. I don't think we even continue to serve the family.
Yep. 1 in 4 children in the U.S. have at least one LEP parent. So whatever you work with children's education, counseling, any service really you provide to children, you're missing 25% of parents that don't understand what you're saying if you only speak in English. So, yeah.
Wow, this has been very eye-opening. I really appreciate you coming in, educating our viewers, educating me, helping everyone to understand that, language access is a painkiller and not something nice to have. It's what you need to have. And there's some monetary benefit to that as well. Uh, thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Burnout. I appreciate being here and having an opportunity to speak with your viewers.
Thank you. Until next time. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm Dr. Kimberly L. Wilson, the host of Leadership Beyond Burnout. You can find us here every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. And until next time.